G'day YouTube, Warbles Onlot here, and yes, this is a mad scientist video. As well as a mad scientist, I've been happy to admit to being the fool on the hill. I'm also a kind of a loudmouth, leading edge, green extremist. So I try to live the philosophy, if I think the world is really decadent, overpowered, over-engineered, I often have a go at living an alternative which is somewhat more appropriate technology for the surroundings, if that makes sense. So anyway, a week ago, Wednesday last week, I was getting along with my day when I suddenly heard the creaking noise of tyres on my driveway as somebody crept up. They'd already got past the gate, but because they were properly country born and bred, they did manage to shut the gate after they came through it. And then, onward and upward, crept the vehicle. I finally heard it when it was probably about here. I came down, and by the time it got to around about here, we spotted each other and the vehicle stopped, and I was confronted by a white utility with a Glen Innes Severn Council logo on the door. Yikes, I thought. Golly gosh, gee darn and shucks, it has finally happened. The council's mandatory spontaneous inspection of my toilet system is about to commence. Gulp. I knew that one of these days it was going to happen. Back in the old days when I first moved up here, the the Severn Shire Council had a policy of basically not interfering with people who lived out in the middle of nowhere unless they received a complaint from the public, and then they had to investigate the complaint. And bad things would happen and you could get given a notice to be evicted, really. It was a please explain, show cause why you should not receive an eviction notice, and in that they'd give you a threat of so many penalty points, which equated to $110,000 per day in fines if you were to continue to occupy a non-approved dwelling. So that was a bit of a worry. Once I had to move out and rent a house. Another time I had to give the Severn Shire Council a letter saying that I had a tent and a sleeping bag in my car, and my ambition was to impact the forest floor as lightly as a traditional Aborigine, and therefore I had no fixed permanent abode, and that little shed up there was merely a place to shelter the telephone from the rain, because there was a family court order that said I had to receive a telephone call every Sunday night from my kids during term time. And the Severn Shire really didn't want to get involved in telling the local greenie that his lifestyle was not high impact enough, so they accepted the letter, and I kept the tent and the sleeping bag in the car. And eventually the Severn Shire Council was amalgamated with the Glen Innes Municipal Council, so now we have the Glen Innes Severn Council, GISC. And things burbled along pretty happily for a while, and I was wondering whether I was going to get harassed after a certain movie about the worst main street in Australia, Glen Innes, was posted. And if I was of a paranoid turn of mind, it would be easy to try and equate the presence of the toilet inspector as a response to the posting of the video. But in the real world, there's this place called Wallace Lake. And at Wallace Lake, there was an historical oyster farming operation going on in the tidal waters, and the real estate agents had a bit of a selling frenzy, and they installed a whole lot of tree changes around the edges of the lake, and people started to sicken, and I think somebody might have died from eating oysters which were contaminated with human Escherichia coliforms, which is a bacteria that normally lives in the human gut. And the presence of it in any watercourse is a direct proportional indication of how much human sewage is in the watercourse. So at Wallace Lake, the people shat in the water until the oysters started killing the people. And therefore, the local government association decided that it would be meet and correct to start going around and inspecting anybody who lives outside the metropolitan area. People who are not connected to the town's sewage system had to prove that their septic tank was properly set up, properly adjusted, and was operating satisfactorily and posed a low risk to community health and amenity and safety. Okay, so I had that visit last week. And so, as I slowly walked the inspector up the rest of the driveway, I said unto the inspector, I don't really know what you're going to think of what I'm going to show you, but I would like you to concentrate not so much on how close my system approaches the recommendations in the manual which is issued to all people who are building a house, but whether my system actually fails any of the critical criteria in order you need to mark off in order to fail. So, I showed him the two 6,000 litre Chinese inflatable swimming pools, which are fed by the cascade drum, which itself receives the water from the side of the roof, which receives bath water from a tree and is therefore not fit to drink. The drinking water drum, which is lidded to minimise evaporation and foreign object incursion, receives its rainwater from the larger side of the roof, which largely does not receive bathwater from a tree. The inspector verified the fabric filter with which mosquito larvae are excluded from the drinking water as it's transferred from the outside storage and collection drum to the ready use drum. He then had a bit of a bo peep from ground level, I must admit, at the roof of the machinery shed. The gutter which it feeds and the water bed turned inside out to function as a water tank, which dually gravity feeds both the solar preheated hose, and he observed that the hose was in fact functional and delivers water not only to the hose but also to the kitchen sink, which is thusly equipped with both running water and also a reliable method of distributing the grey water from the kitchen sink uphill in order to water the lawn around the hut as a permanent ongoing attempt at fire suppression. The British Empire's finest hand-powered tumbling washing machine was inspected, as was the galvanised iron tray and the second-hand ridge cap, which is used inverted to form an impromptu temporary gutter, which all go together in such a way that the grey water from the washing machine is led out to water the lawn on the north side of the hut. The water itself being bucketed in from the bottom boy wall, which receives its water from the top boy wall, the cascade tank, and the light blue bits are of course patches where hailstones have left holes. And the inspector appeared impressed by the fact that the water wasn't simply siphoned across, it was filtered as it was transferred using the 240 volt 40 watt pump with which the pools are supplied. The pump of course runs on pyramid power. See, that's the sound of pyramid power. Coming out through the Altronic electric inverter. having first been captured by the Tower of Power. Now, I know there's some among you who are going to say that I'd fed him with too much information, but my line of advance was to try and hide nothing. So then we moved on to what he was actually here to look at. This, sewn together with tie wire out of sawmill offcuts. The first structure that I ever designed and built after putting together the original Victor Traco lawn locker, which actually lies at the core of my palatial mansion. Way before you can justify cobbling together a machinery shed, so-called, one has to have a place to crap. So, I showed him the fly-proof Parks and Wildlife standard lid covering the 20-litre plastic bucket, which so terribly horrifies most of the females who ever visit, including my brother's wife and my brother's mate's wife and my cousin and my cousin's wife. And then I showed him the scoop and the ash bucket, and he said, "Oh yes, I see, so the ashes is just like putting lime on. Good idea." Then we looked again at the water hose. He considered the shit pot stirring stick with its turned handle, and then I took him on a bit of a walk. Quite a long one, but he was wearing shoes, so that wasn't much of a problem. We went past the dam, which is dry, through the country which has been burnt off, and when we got over here to the windrows, I pointed out to him several rabbit burrow entrances which I have filled up with sewage slurry, showing places where the rabbits have been entirely suppressed by my previous activities, like here where the second last toilet bucket was emptied, and here where the most recent one was deposited. I was even able to point out impact marks from the shit pot stirring stick when it's been used to cascade dirt over the top of the sewage to prevent blowflies from gaining access to it. I also showed him where the next full can's going to go, and so on the grounds that it's proof against insects, you can't smell any sewage, you can't tread in any sewage, it doesn't contaminate or impact on any water sources or water courses or my boundary, it can't be seen by my neighbours, it doesn't tick any of the fail boxes. And as he said, this country's not fit for digging, so you can't install a normal septic tank, and a normal composting toilet costs a lot of money and has to be built right up off the ground. And the Feral Animals Act requires landholders to take some action to suppress feral species like rabbits, so it ticks that box as well. And it buffers the sewage, turns it into compost, puts it underground, and once again covers it up with dirt so the flies can't get at it. So because the Glen Innes Severn Council was interested in outcomes rather than procedures, and it's a very flexible council, inspection number 0895, 5th of 11th 14, Chris Wharton, at the time of inspection, your on-site sewage system composting toilet was operating satisfactorily. Council officer signature, risk low. Now, I do believe that puts me in possession of the world's simplest, cheapest, most efficient, council-approved dry composting toilet. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao. I haven't been a world leader like that since I invented the sunfoil. Snicker, snicker, snark. Chortle, 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 tee-hee.